Sandra Bullock's unexpected, emotional reaction to Keanu's heartfelt gesture turned a normal interview into a moment of pure, unscripted magic. The chemistry between them was so real that the host was left completely speechless, just watching it unfold. Sandra always thought she knew what strong meant: box office hits, red carpet smiles, flawless interviews. Keanu thought strength was quieter, showing up on time, listening more than talking, and walking through pain without letting it turn into bitterness. Neither of them expected that one live interview in front of millions would force both of their definitions to collide. The studio lights felt hotter than usual that afternoon. Sandra sat on the gray couch in a bright red dress, pulling her shoulders back, rehearsing the same polished stories she'd told 100 times. The audience was warm, the cameras were ready, and the host was already smiling his perfect television smile. Then Keanu walked in, dressed in simple black, like he'd just stepped off a bus instead of out of a limousine, and the whole room seemed to exhale. He gave a small wave to the crowd, then glanced at Sandra, and for a brief second, something raw flashed in his eyes: recognition, relief, and something that looked a lot like unfinished business. They hadn't seen each other in person for years, not really. Hollywood events didn't count. Quick hugs on carpets, rushed hellos backstage, that was surface level, safe. But this show was different. The producers wanted real chemistry, real memories, real talk. They wanted the legendary duo back on the same couch, digging into nostalgia. What no one knew was that behind their easy banter about their hit movie together, there was a night from long ago that neither of them had ever spoken about publicly. A night where a single choice, made in a dark parking lot behind a studio lot, had quietly changed both of their lives. The host dove straight into the jokes, asking about dangerous stunts, awkward kissing scenes, and who forgot their lines more. The audience laughed, and Sandra performed on cue, rolling her eyes at herself, exaggerating stories, keeping the energy light. Keanu played along too, adding his dry, understated humor, turning his own mistakes into self-deprecating punchlines. On the surface, it was exactly what everyone hoped for: fun, nostalgic, charming. But under the laughter, Sandra felt an old tightness in her chest. That same knot she'd ignored the last time she burned herself out trying to be perfect for everyone else. As the segment went on, the host asked about the hardest times in their careers. Sandra shifted uneasily. She knew what she was supposed to say: early auditions, getting rejected, reading bad reviews. A safe answer. Instead, her mind flashed to the year when she'd locked herself in her house, exhausted and hollow, pretending everything was fine while her personal life quietly fell apart. The cameras were on, millions of eyes were waiting. She opened her mouth to give the rehearsed response, then caught Keanu watching her, his gaze steady, quietly encouraging, as if telling her it was okay to be honest for once. Without entirely knowing why, Sandra changed her answer. Her voice softened, lost its performative shine. She talked about a time when success didn't feel like success at all, when she felt like she'd built a perfect life on a hollow foundation. She hinted at betrayal, at losing trust in people she thought would never hurt her. The audience grew still. The host leaned forward, sensing something deeper than a typical talk show confession. Sandra's hands trembled slightly as she spoke, and she tried to hide it by folding them in her lap. She didn't mention names, didn't drag anyone through the mud, but there was enough emotion in her voice to make the entire studio lean closer. The host, seizing the opportunity, turned to Keanu. "Have you ever seen Sandra at her lowest?" he asked, half teasing, half curious. It was meant to be light, but the question landed like a stone between them. Sandra's head snapped toward Keanu, eyes widening just a little. He held her gaze, and for the first time that afternoon, his smile disappeared. He could have kept it safe, too. He could have shrugged, made a joke, said something clever about coffee and early call times. Instead, he inhaled slowly, as if weighing something very old and very heavy. The studio fell into a strange silence as Keanu's expression shifted, his usually calm face shadowed by something darker. He looked down at his hands, then back at Sandra, and the air changed, thicker, more intimate, like they were suddenly alone despite the cameras and the crowd. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I have." His voice had that steady, grounded tone that made people instinctively believe him. The host blinked, sensing a story, and the control room probably lit up with frantic excitement. But Keanu didn't meet the host's eyes. He kept looking at Sandra like he was asking permission without words. Sandra felt her heartbeat hammering in her ears. Memories she'd buried resurfaced in sharp detail. Late-night filming, a dark parking lot, a shouting voice, fear like ice in her veins, and then Keanu's hand on her shoulder pulling her behind him. She realized what he was about to say, what he might be about to reveal after all these years. Her instincts screamed to steer the show back to safe ground, to crack a joke, to hide again behind the practiced version of herself. But beneath the fear was something else. A strange, rising sense of courage. A whisper that maybe it was time this story was told, not as gossip, but as a reminder of what real kindness and quiet bravery looked like. Keanu finally turned his head toward the host, breaking their shared gaze. His jaw tightened for a moment like he was still fighting an internal battle. Then he spoke with a slow, deliberate calm. "There was one night," he said, "when things got dangerous." The word hung in the air like a dropped glass. The audience murmured softly, shifting in their seats. The host's practiced smile faded, replaced with genuine shock and curiosity. Sandra's fingers curled into the fabric of her dress as images flooded her mind, sharper than she wanted them to be. She knew this wasn't just an anecdote for entertainment. This was the night she'd quietly rewritten her ideas about trust, fear, and what real protection feels like. As every camera zoomed in and the entire room leaned forward, Keanu paused, looking back at Sandra for the smallest nod of consent. Her throat felt tight, her chest burning with unspoken words. For a heartbeat, she sat frozen, torn between self-protection and the possibility of finally turning her worst memory into something that might actually help someone watching at home. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if she'd let him open a door she'd spent years nailing shut. The night in the parking lot. Keanu saw the flicker in Sandra's eyes, fear, yes, but also a quiet, tired courage. It was the same look she'd had that night years ago when they both walked off set long after midnight. Back then, the lot was almost empty, the air cold enough that you could see your breath. The crew had packed up, the laughter had drained away, and the only sounds were the echo of their footsteps and the hum of distant generators. Sandra had been exhausted, makeup half wiped off, hair tied back, carrying too many bags because she never wanted to ask anyone to help. She joked about being fine, the way people do when they're anything but. He remembered watching her walk toward her car, that lonely spot in the far corner of the lot where the light flickered and the shadows stretched too long. At first, he'd turned toward his own car, keys in hand, mind already on a hot shower and a few quiet pages of a book. But then he heard it, a low, angry voice cutting through the stillness, followed by another, desperate one that he recognized instantly. Sandra's. It wasn't her usual bright, deflecting tone. It was tighter, strained, pleading. He didn't think. His body moved before his brain did, feet pounding against the asphalt as he rounded the row of parked trailers. When he reached her, he saw her backed up against her car door, shoulders tense, eyes wide. A man stood too close, someone from the crew who'd had a few drinks too many, someone who had mistaken her kindness for permission. He wasn't hitting her, but his words were sharp, bitter, and his hand was pressed flat against the car near her shoulder, caging her in. Sandra had that frozen look so many people get when they're trying to decide between fighting, fleeing, or just shutting down and waiting for it to be over. She caught sight of Keanu over the man's shoulder, and that flash of relief in her face was something he never forgot. Keanu stepped between them without raising his voice, without making a scene. "Hey," he said, calm and firm, "step back." The guy laughed, tried to brush him off, muttering something about minding his own business. The air tightened. Keanu didn't move. He wasn't playing an action hero. There were no choreographed punches, no clever lines. He simply used his body as a barrier, keeping himself between Sandra and the man, his posture relaxed but unshakable. When the guy put a hand on his arm and squeezed, trying to shove past him, Keanu took his wrist, pushed it away with a quiet strength that said, "Enough." There was a brief, tense moment where it could have escalated into real violence. Instead, Keanu chose something harder than throwing a punch. He looked the man straight in the eyes and said, "You're better than this. Walk away." Maybe it was the certainty in his tone, or the realization that he was crossing a line with witnesses now, or maybe there was still a piece of decency left in him. Whatever the reason, the man finally tore his gaze away, muttered something under his breath, and stumbled back into the darkness of the lot. The danger didn't end with a dramatic knockout. It ended with a quiet choice, and a heavy silence that felt somehow louder than shouting. Sandra's knees almost buckled with the sudden release of tension. Keanu turned to her, his voice gentle now, asking if she was okay, if she wanted to report it, if there was someone she wanted him to call. She stared at him, trying to decide whether to cry, scream, or laugh. Instead, she did what she always did, she minimized it. "I'm fine, it's fine, nothing happened," she said, her voice shaking just enough to betray her. Keanu didn't argue, didn't tell her she was wrong. He just opened her car door, took her bags, and waited until she was safely inside. Before she drove off, he leaned down and said something that stuck with her. "Your safety is not an inconvenience." Back in the present, on that brightly lit stage, Keanu's voice carried the weight of that memory without giving away every detail. "There was a night when someone crossed a line," he told the host in the crowd, "and she tried to handle it alone. She shouldn't have had to." The host's mouth opened slightly, eyes widening with the realization that this wasn't a manufactured story. The audience shifted, some frowning, some nodding, some already recognizing a version of their own story in hers. Sandra felt exposed, but also strangely seen, like someone had finally turned on the lights in a room she'd been stumbling through in the dark. She swallowed hard, trying to stay composed. The show could have turned the moment into cheap drama, milking it for gasps and headlines, but something in Keanu's steady, respectful tone made it clear this wasn't about gossip. It was about safety, about courage that doesn't look glamorous, about the terrifying, everyday reality that even the strongest-looking people can find themselves cornered and afraid. The host started to speak, then stopped, as if realizing that jokes wouldn't survive in this moment. All eyes shifted back to Sandra, waiting to see if she would confirm it, deny it, or shut everything down with a practiced smile. Sandra's fingers dug into the couch cushion as she weighed her options. She could laugh it off, redirect the conversation, protect the fantasy that her life had always been light, fun, effortless. Or she could step into the vulnerability that terrified her and tell the truth, not in a way that destroyed anyone, but in a way that might finally free her from the secret she'd been quietly carrying. Her heart pounded, breath shallow, as the silence stretched. Keanu watched her with that same quiet, patient expression from that night in the parking lot, as if to say, "Whatever you do, I've got your back." And as the cameras captured every flicker of emotion on her face, Sandra realized that her next words would change far more than the tone of an interview. She opened her mouth, feeling the edges of years of silence finally starting to crack, and chose to step forward instead of retreating, only to be suddenly interrupted by a voice in her earpiece, the producer's urgent whisper telling the host to cut to commercial in 10 seconds, or risk losing the network's comfort zone entirely. Breaking the script. The host pressed a finger to his earpiece, eyes flicking toward the nearest camera as the countdown began in his head. He was trained for this: keep the show moving, keep things safe, keep advertisers happy. The control room wanted a clean cut to commercial, then maybe a lighter segment when they returned. But sitting there between Sandra's trembling honesty and Keanu's calm resolve, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a genuine moral conflict. His polished smile faltered. He could shut this down, protect the format, and everyone would go back to pretending. "1 minute," the producer hissed in his ear. "Bring it to break, now we'll pivot after." He was about to do it. The words, "We'll be right back after this," were already forming on his tongue when he glanced at Sandra. Her hand was still pressed against her chest, fingers curled, eyes bright with unshed tears she was too proud to let fall on national television. Keanu's gaze was fixed on her, not on the cameras or on his own image, but on whether she felt safe enough to speak. This wasn't scandal, this was a crossroads. The host suddenly wondered, when he had last done something on his show that felt truly human, rather than merely entertaining. He inhaled sharply and made a choice that surprised even him. Instead of cutting to commercial, he leaned forward, voice softer than before. "Sandra," he said quietly, ignoring the alarmed shouting in his earpiece, "you don't have to share more than you're comfortable with, but if there's something you wish someone had told you back then, something someone watching right now might need to hear, this is your space." The control room exploded in his ear. "What are you doing?" "Cut." Cut, but he turned the volume down with a discreet tap on the belt pack, shutting out the panic and leaving only the silence of the studio and the sound of her breathing. The entire audience felt the shift. This wasn't a show anymore, it was a conversation that had been waiting years to happen. Sandra blinked, surprised by the unexpected kindness in the host's offer. For once, she wasn't being pushed for details or a headline. She was being invited to say something that mattered. Her heart hammered harder. This was more terrifying than any stunt she'd ever done, any scene she'd ever shot with explosions and car chases. There were no retakes here. No editing. Just the raw, irreversible truth. She glanced at Keanu, as if asking, if I say it, will it break me? He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, not telling her what to do, but reminding her of who she was. Not just the glamorous, laughing woman in red, but the person who had survived heartbreak, betrayal, pressure, and fear without letting any of it turn her cruel. The person who still believed in kindness even when the world didn't deserve it. She drew in a shaky breath, straightened her shoulders, and for the first time that day stopped performing. I used to think, she began, her voice low but steady, that if anything bad happened to me it meant I'd done something wrong, that I'd been too friendly, too naive, too stupid. The word caught in her throat, but she forced herself to continue. So when that night happened, I blamed myself. I told myself it wasn't a big deal because nothing really happened. I let fear and shame sit in the same room with me for years. The hush settled over the crowd, the kind that only comes when people recognize a truth they've been afraid to name in their own lives. She glanced at Keanu again, her eyes softer now. But someone stood between me and something worse, not because he wanted credit or press or to be a hero. He just liked the idea of me existing in the world without that kind of damage. Keanu shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the spotlight turning toward him, but he didn't look away. Sandra's lips trembled into a small, sad smile. That night didn't just scare me. It forced me to ask, why am I so used to facing danger alone? Why do I feel guilty for needing help? The host swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. He thought about viewers at home, women, men, teenagers sitting on couches, maybe with their own memories of nights they'd minimized, brushed off, swallowed. The control room's flashing messages on his monitor, break now. Change topic, felt further and further away, like noise from another planet. He knew the network might punish him for this, maybe cut a segment from his highlights reel, but he found he no longer cared as much as he thought he would. Something more important was happening. Sandra's gaze drifted out past the cameras to people she couldn't see but could almost feel. If you're watching this and telling yourself what happened to you wasn't that bad, she said, voice gaining strength, please hear me, your fear is valid, your discomfort is valid, asking for help isn't weakness, it's courage. And if you ever see someone cornered, frozen, trying to laugh it off, don't look away. Kindness in that moment can change a life. Her words echoed into the quiet, sinking into hearts that would remember them long after the show ended. Keanu's jaw tightened with emotion he rarely let show in public. The host felt his chest ache, stunned by the weight and beauty of what she'd just given the audience. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then somewhere in the back row, a single person started to clap, gentle and tentative. Others joined, the sound building layer by layer until it became a wave of applause that seemed to say, we see you. We believe you. Thank you. Sandra's shoulders shook, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from the strange, overwhelming relief of finally being heard. The host lifted his hand, trying to gently calm the clapping. He still had a show to run, questions unasked, producers likely fuming. But before he could regroup and move the conversation forward, a red light started flashing on the nearest camera. Something was wrong in the control room. A floor manager hurried toward him with a strained look on her face, whispering something that made his brows shoot up in shock. Whatever it wasn't about ratings or time slots. It was something that would force all three of them, Sandra, Keanu, and the host, to test every word they'd just spoken about courage and resilience in real time. Live fire. The floor manager's voice was low but urgent, barely audible to anyone but the host. We've got a situation at the stage door, she whispered. Security issue. Someone got in who shouldn't have. They're trying to handle it, but we may have to cut the feed. The host's stomach dropped. He'd been doing live television for years and had heard about stalkers, threats, unstable fans, but this felt different, timed too perfectly with everything they just dug up on air. He forced his expression to stay neutral for the cameras even as his mind raced. If he acknowledged the situation, he risked panic in the audience. If he ignored it and it escalated, he'd never forgive himself. The control room crackled in his earpiece again, this time with a different tone, less about sponsors, more about safety. We're locking down exits, a tense voice said. Stay calm, keep them talking. We might need to cut to a pre-recorded segment if this gets worse. The host's pulse hammered. Keep them talking sounded easy, until you realized every word might be unfolding under the shadow of a growing threat. Sandra and Keanu watched his face with quiet concern, catching the subtle shift in energy. "What's going on?" Sandra asked softly, too experienced not to sense when something was off. The host hesitated, tempted to lie to keep the illusion of control. But after what she'd just offered the audience, real vulnerability, real truth, he couldn't bring himself to slap a fake smile over a real danger. He took a breath and chose honesty. "There might be a security issue outside," he said carefully. "They're handling it. You're safe here. But we may need to stay on this couch longer than planned." The audience murmured, unease rippling through the studio like a cold draft. Keanu's posture changed instantly. The easy, slouched comfort was gone, replaced by the focused stillness of someone who knew how quickly a calm room could turn chaotic. He subtly scanned the exits, the aisles, the distance to the nearest stage door. It was a habit he'd picked up not from his movies, but from years of walking through life with a quiet awareness that not everyone in a crowd comes with good intentions. Rather than feeding the fear, he leaned in, his voice surprisingly steady. "Then maybe we use the time," he said. "We've been talking about courage like it's just a story. Maybe this is where we prove it's more than that." His words hit differently now, charged by the possibility that something dangerous was unfolding just beyond the walls. The host nodded slowly, feeling the truth of it. Fear was already in the room. The only choice left was how they would respond to it. To distract and anchor the audience, the host shifted the focus back to the pair on the couch. "You both have done action movies, played brave characters," he said. "But in real life, courage looks different. When were you the most afraid and still showed up anyway?" It was more than a talk show question now. It was a quiet invitation for everyone listening, both in the studio and at home, to reflect on their own hidden battles. Sandra exhaled, the nerves from earlier mixing with this new, sharper anxiety. But instead of shutting down, she leaned into the moment. "You know," she said, her voice gentler than before, "people think the bravest thing I've ever done is jump from a bus or run through explosions on camera. That's not bravery. Those were controlled risks with stunt teams and safety nets. Real courage was getting out of bed on mornings when my heart felt like broken glass. Showing up to set when my personal life was on fire and choosing not to let bitterness poison who I was." Her eyes glistened, but there was steel in her tone now, too. "Courage is choosing kindness when the world gives you every reason not to." Keanu listened, then added quietly, "For me, it was learning to live without people I thought I couldn't live without. Grief is heavy. It makes the world look smaller. But every time I choose to show up, to be gentle instead of angry, to text a friend back instead of vanishing, that's courage too. It doesn't look like much from the outside, but it's the only reason I'm still here, still myself." His words washed over the room, simple but profound, like a calm hand on a shaking shoulder. The audience had gone completely still, their earlier unease softening into something more grounded. You could feel dozens of private stories sparking in people's minds. Losses, heartbreaks, nights of quiet panic, suddenly seen through a new lens. The host felt his own throat tighten. He'd always thought of bravery as something loud, visible, headline-worthy. Now, sitting between these two, with an unknown threat lurking outside and a nation watching, he realized that the bravest thing anyone could do on live television might simply be to stay honest, when it would be so much easier to hide. As if on cue, a loud bang echoed somewhere beyond the studio doors, metal on metal, distant but unmistakable. Several people in the audience flinched. A few heads snapped toward the sound. Security moved quickly along the aisles, signaling for everyone to stay seated. The floor manager's face had gone pale, her walkie-talkie crackling with clipped instructions. The host's heart slammed into his ribs. He forced himself to keep his voice calm. "Stay with us," he said to the viewers, but he was speaking just as much to the people in the room. "We're here, we're together, and everything is being handled." He turned back toward Sandra and Keanu, desperate to hold the fragile thread of calm. Before he could speak, a member of security rushed up to the edge of the stage, whispering something that made the floor manager stiffen. Whatever was happening outside was getting closer to their carefully constructed world of lights, cameras, and comforting narratives. The thin line between scripted bravery and real, unpredictable danger had never felt so fragile. And as the host looked at his guests, one in a red dress, one in a simple black suit, He realized the next decision might require more courage than anything in their carefully curated careers. Whether to quietly shut everything down or to keep the cameras rolling and find a way to turn this moment, chaos and all, into a living example of resilience for everyone watching in fear on the other side of the screen.